Hi, my name is Elisa Farja.
And I'm Eric Lorenzo.
For our group project, we decided to do a study on public transportation. Eric rides the Max and saw a statistic that read 45% of all PSU students ride public transportation to campus. That piqued our interest and we wanted to test to see if that was accurate or not.
Our population was PSU students, and the sample we chose were PSU students in our very own Stats 244 class. The variables were students taking public transportation to campus and students not taking public transportation to campus. The information was collected by emailing out the survey that we created through SurveyMonkey to all PSU students in our Stats 244 class. SurveyMonkey conveniently organized all our responses and data into proportions and graphs so that we could clearly see how the numbers turned out.
Of the 158 surveys sent out, 82 responded. Of the 82 students who responded, 37 of them used public transportation to ride to.
We ran a proportion test to test the claim that 45% of all PSU students ride public transportation.
With alpha set to a 0.05 significance level, we got a p-value of 0.9823, a z-value, which is our test statistic, of 0.0222, with critical values of negative 1.96 and 1.96. Since our p-value was greater than the significance level and our test statistic did not lie on the critical tails, we concluded to not reject the claim. There's not enough evidence to reject the claim that 45% of all PSU students use public transportation for commuting to campus.
We also ran a 95% confidence interval. We are 95% confident that the number of students who ride public transportation to campus is between 34.5% and 55.9%.
In addition to testing TriMet's claim, we had other questions. We wanted to know if there was a correlation between how far students travel and the number of times per week they were on campus. We also wanted to know why students took public transportation and if their using public transportation was independent of owning a car. To find these answers, we ran a correlation, a goodness of fit test, and a test for independence.
For our correlation, we wanted to see if there is a linear relationship between the distance traveled and the number of times per week students traveled to campus. The variables in this test were distance traveled and how many times per week students were on campus. To collect this data through the survey, we had students enter exactly how many miles they traveled, and then they had to choose of selecting 1 time, 2 times, or 3 or more times traveling per week.
We found that 65% travel 3 or more times per week to campus, 27.5% travel twice per week, and 7.5% travel once per week. We also found that the average number of miles traveled is about 19.
After running the correlation with the raw data from these two variables at a 0.05 significance level, we got a p-value of 0.54063, a test statistic of 0.6145 with critical values of negative 1.99 and 1.99, and a sample of 0.06854 with critical values of negative 0.22 and 0.22.
Again, the p-value is greater than the significance level. Neither our test statistic or sample correlation fall within the critical tails. Our claim cannot be accepted, and there is not enough evidence to suggest that there is a significant linear relationship between distance traveled and the number of times per week a student travels to campus.
Next, we ran a goodness of fit test. We know there are many reasons why students take public transportation, but we wanted to know why and figure out if at least one of the proportions was higher than the others. The variables we used in this test were lack of car, financial reasons, environmental purposes, and other factors.
We observed that 19 were due to lack of car, 15 for financial reasons, 13 for environmental purposes, and 16 for other factors.
After running the test at a 0.05 significance level, we came up with a test statistic of 1.1904 and a critical value of 7.815. Once again, our test statistic does not fall within the critical region, so we cannot reject the H-null. There is not enough evidence to support the claim that at least one of the proportion is different. Finally, for our last test, we wanted to know if the students who use public transportation for commuting to campus is independent of owning a car. Our variables for this test were students who use public transportation also own a car, students who don't use public transportation and they own a car, students who ride without owning a car, and students who don't own ride and don't own a car.
We observed that 26 students ride public transportation and also own a car, 32 don't ride and own a car, 11 ride and don't own a car, and 13 ride and don't own a car.
After running the test at a 0.05 significance level, we got a p-value of 0.9336, a test statistic of 0.006934 with critical values of 3.841. Based on information, we cannot reject the claim. There is not enough evidence to reject the claim that students who use public transportation for commuting to PSU is independent of owning a car.
To sum it up, we have concluded that TriMet's statistic that 45% of all PSU students ride public transportation to campus is supported. There is no significant relationship between how far a student has to travel and how many miles per week they are on campus. Reasons why students ride public transportation is fairly equally proportionate between lack of car, finances, environmental, and other factors. Also, owning a car is independent of whether a student rides public transportation or not.
Some problems we encountered were that we were not specific about how students should report their distance traveled. Some gave us round trip numbers and others just one-way distances, so we had to put in a little bit extra work to straighten out that. I'm sure there was some error on how we went about doing that, which could have skewed our data. We also couldn't relate our initial question to many other quantitative questions and therefore were limited to running all proportion tests. We also found that some of the students who answered the survey did not read the entire questions, therefore answering skewed our data. If we were to do this over, we would be more specific and also provide multiple choice questions on our survey.